and welcome to Education USA Oceanic Virtual Week. This is Wednesday, day 3 of our program. This is program number 2 for the morning, and last but not least, the last one of today, and you will not be disappointed. This program this week is represented by 20 US institutions. My name is Samantha. I'm the Education USA Coordinator and Advisor in Melbourne. Education USA is a US Department of State network and your official source of US higher education and information. There is going to be some great information shared with you today. I'm sure it's going to prompt a whole lot of questions as well. We do ask that you put your questions through the Slido account, which will be on the bottom of all the slides. And if you can't find that, go to www.slido and put those questions in during the course of the session. I have the absolute pleasure in moderating today's programming and kicking off this session, college sports at NCAA institutions. I'm a former student athlete in the US. I was there at a Division I golf program, so this opportunity is near and dear to my heart. This session obviously is going to be talking to anyone that is aspiring to be recruited as a student athlete, and today we're really focusing on those opportunities at NCAA US institutions. We have the absolute pleasure to have 3 excellent individuals joining us today who are going to talk you through this process. We're going to have 2 people representing their admissions sites at their US colleges, and then we actually have the absolute pleasure of Heather Marini also joining us from Brown University, who is the quarterback coach for their US football team. You heard me right, the quarterback coach for their US football team at Brown. Also a Melbourneian that is now located in the US. So it's all about following your goals, following your dreams, and knowing that process in place to help you do that. So I'm going to throw it over to these wonderful individuals. They are going to lead us through today's session. As I've already discussed, Heather is an NCAA coach. Heather will be with us through the whole session today, but NCAA rules do not allow her to be a part of the question and answer segment of today, but I know that everyone is probably going to get all those questions answered through what they share. So over to this great group, and I thank Seth, lead it out.
Perfect. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for having us. What we'll do to start out with is maybe just do a quick introduction of each of us. So as you heard, my name is Seth Walker. I represent Indiana University. I'm in their Office of International Services here. So I do quite a bit of the admission on the side of the house. So even when I started here, which it's shocking to say this out loud, but I started full-time in 2012 after I finished graduate school. And right then I started working on international athletes and the admission process. So Indiana University, we're a Division I, we're in the Big Ten. We have about 22 to 24 programs, depending on the year and how you count them. We're at the highest level of competition, 223 Olympic berths representing 25 countries, quite a few from Australia and New Zealand. So yeah, we're wonderful to be here and great to have all you on the call today. So Heather, you want to kick it off after that?
Hi everyone, thanks Seth. Great having everybody here today, and I'm really excited to talk a little bit about sports and recruitment from a coach's perspective. Seth and Kaylani are definitely experts from an admission point of view. But I came through the US sports from Australia as a coach. I coached American football in Australia for a really long time with the Monash University Warriors. I played netball and tennis growing up before I saw American football for the first time, and have a degree from Deakin University and from Monash University. So I've kind of, been through a lot of maybe what you've been through in terms of your studies in Australia, and hopefully I can give you a good insight into what we're looking at from a coaching perspective.
Hi, I'm Kaylani Lofna. I'm here representing Davidson College. I'm the Director of International Admission and Financial Aid. I've been at Davidson 7 years and I've worked in higher education with international students for 12. I was a student athlete myself, so it's near and dear to my heart. As you heard Samantha Jackson share, I swam in college at a small Division I school. And I started the process late, which is why I love helping students early in the process, which is something we'll talk about. Davidson College is one of the smallest Division I schools in the United States. About 25% of our students are Division I athletes. And we have 21 NCAA Division I sports. And we're located in North Carolina. I look forward to having this time with you. Thanks.
Perfect. So to give you a little bit of an idea of what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be talking about some of the major governing bodies when it comes to athletics in the United States. We'll talk a little bit about eligibility, amateurism. We'll talk about your journey as an international athlete, student athlete. And then we'll also do some how we can help, which is going to be opening up for questions. So what we'll attempt to do is, without flying through this too quickly, we'll attempt to go through a lot of detailed information, but give a lot of time for your questions to be answered, or you really digest some stuff and bring it back to us. So that is the plan for the day. I hope that sounds good for everybody out there. So the major governing bodies of collegiate level athletics. The one that you are probably most familiar with is the NCAA. I feel like I have to put $1 every time in the swear jar when I say NCAA. I guess I'm not supposed to say NCAA. I think it's NCAA. As you can see, there's 3 different divisions in the NCAA. There's Division I, II, and III. Well, we all represent Division I of the 350 members. Division II and Division III, as we'll get into a little bit later, also provide some really competitive athletic opportunities as well as differing scholarship opportunities. NAIA, which is maybe a little less known for students overseas, is the National Association of Intercollegiate Athletics. As you can see, about 250 member schools. They're smaller schools. Sometimes they offer a few different sports or fewer sports, and the entry requirements to the NAIA schools might be a little bit different than the student athletes will experience in the NCAA. Sorry. The last one is the NJCAA, which is the National Junior College Athletic Association. These are most of the 2-year schools where you start with an associate's degree and then you transfer to a 4-year institution. We'll get into those a little bit more later, but I think most of you all probably on the call are thinking NCAA or thinking Division I, II, or III. So knowing that that's where we're coming from and those are the universities that we represent, that's probably the kind of lens or the perspective that you're going to hear most about during this presentation. And in that spirit, here's a little bit about the athletics or the sports that you can expect to see at an NCAA school. I do want to make it very clear that all of these sports are not offered at all NCAA universities. I know I'm probably breaking the hearts of many women bowlers out there, but Indiana University doesn't have a women's bowling team, even though that is an NCAA sport in the winter. So you can see kind of the seasons that these sports are offered, and which ones are Division I. Some students are thinking that there might be a really, really popular sport in your home country, but that sport might not be represented or might not be a varsity level sport at an NCAA university. The NCAA does put out that there's a few emerging sports. Rugby is a big one that we hear about. Triathletes, and also equestrian sports. So I think the NCAA puts those out there to say, keep that in mind. We're thinking about that. We've heard that a lot of people really enjoy this. They're not varsity sports yet, but they're on the radar of the NCAA. So to give you an idea next about what international students, how international students are represented by citizenship in the NCAA, you'll see these are numbers from 2018, and these are the percentages of international students from their home or citizenship country. You can see that Canada, probably mostly by proximity, dominates when it comes to the percentage of international students as student athletes at NCAA schools, but the representation from Australia and New Zealand is very, very strong compared to the populations you have. So it's a good sign to see that you're very, very high on these lists, the top 10 countries, but yet you don't represent necessarily a very, very large country compared to the other folks in the top 10. So that's good news. Yeah. In that vein, there is some not necessarily bad news. I don't mean for it to be bad news, but there's a reality or a perspective to take when you're thinking about the competition or the probability of competing at an NCAA university. While this isn't necessarily the odds or the roll of the dice in like a casino type thing, it does show you the number of high school participants, the NCAA participants, and the percentage of students that go from high school to play at the NCAA by Division I, II, and III. And in the slide you see right now, these are men's sports. This isn't to kill any dreams. This isn't to get you bummed out or disappointed or quit playing your sport. This is simply to provide accurate expectations for what you should be thinking about when you're thinking about playing at especially Division I, Division II, and Division III sports in the NCAA, that the student athletes who make it from high school, especially to a Division I level, are the very, very elite students at their high schools and probably in their state and definitely in their region, especially at Division I. So the next slide are the same sports or similar sports, but from the women's perspective, the estimated probability of competing. So I'll let you digest those and again reiterate that this is simply to show that the work that you'll be talking about in a little bit, about contacting coaches, about getting yourself noticed, about the process, it is an involved process. There's no guarantee in playing at some of these universities, and it takes a little bit of gumption, a little bit of effort to be noticed, especially when you see the percentages and how low they are of students making the transition to the NCAA. So now that we're done with that downer of a slide, or hopefully it shouldn't be a downer of a slide, it should be like an inspirational slide that you're going to work 10 times as hard to be in that 2 to 5% of students that make it to Division I or Division II or Division III. So to give you a bit more in-depth from the NCAA perspective on what Division I, Division II, and Division III look like. Division I, if you don't know, it's the largest enrollment. As you can see, the average number of enrollment is 12,900 at Division I schools. Division I also boasts usually the largest budgets for athletics, usually boasts the most diverse academic programs, usually have the most diverse sports, and will definitely be the highest profile, whether that's national airtime, whether that is folks going into the Olympics from university sports. And you can see some of the numbers on the right about the average number of sports that are at these universities, also the average number of students participating. That's something to keep in mind as we compare with Division II and Division III, that only 4% of students at these universities are engaged in sport. The number of national championships offered, and then you also see participation. One thing to keep in mind as we go through the next two slides is that last point of 57% of student athletes will receive some type of athletic aid. So as we go through Division II and Division III, keep an eye on that little number. So Division II. Division II, there's a growth of opportunities through academic achievement, maybe a little bit more of a balance between your academics and your sport. That's not to say that sport at Division I is lopsided. It's just very, very competitive. It's still at Division II, though. Don't think it's a slouch sporting division. It's a very, very high level of competition. And Division II schools will boast a lot of community engagement in the areas where their schools are. If you look to the right, you'll see the numbers and how we can compare them to Division I. You'll see that the percentage of students participating in sport is much higher. And then you'll also see at the very bottom that the percentage of students receiving athletic aid is just a little bit higher than Division I. So finally, in Division III, this is where students you see much more focus on academic success. There's absolutely no athletic scholarships given in Division III. They boast that there's a meaningful athletic opportunity with Division III to balance your academics and your athletics. As you can see, 1 out of 6 students at these universities are athletes. So the number of athletes, or the ratio, is quite high. And I think one myth to dispel as you look down at the bottom of that participation section is that 80% of students at Division III receive some type of academic scholarship or need-based aid. So I do think it's a fallacy to think that, oh, Division III, there's no scholarships available whatsoever. They just may not be athletic scholarships. So keep that in mind as you're looking and comparing the 3 different divisions. We'll go into much more detail with this, but to give you a little bit of a taste about the eligibility requirements and the difference in eligibility requirements between these three divisions, you'll see that the NCAA has a few more kind of boxes to tick, where there's core courses. Don't worry, we'll talk about core courses in a little bit. Within your 4 years of high school, Division I will use a sliding scale with your performance in high school and your standardized test. Don't worry, we'll get further into this sliding scale later. And you'll see the minimum GPA on a United States 4.0 GPA scale. NAIA, you'll see that those are some of the same criteria in the sense of SAT or test scores, GPA, but you'll see that some of those minimums are a little bit lower than the NCAA. And then the NJCAA, you'll see that those requirements, at least academically, are a little bit lower as well. So this is just for your information to keep in mind. When it comes to eligibility, one of the last things that I'll mention before handing it over, when we talk about eligibility, one thing that if you're not aware of already is the NCAA's Eligibility Center. The NCAA's Eligibility Center is very, very important for you as a prospective or potential student athlete. This is where, as you can see on the left, you'll enter your email address, your demographic information, all of your education history. You'll talk about any additional coursework you've taken. You'll put in your athletic resume. It's basically your profile housed on the NCAA's website. You'll see on the right that it's required for Division I and Division II students, that there is a fee involved, and that it'll give you all of your sports school information. And the last two are pretty important, that this NLI, which we'll talk about in a second, if you haven't heard of the National Letter of Intent, that the NLI, you have to go through this eligibility center and be approved before that can be signed. And it's also required for any visits. If you want to make an official visit to an NCAA school at Division I or II level, you have to go through the eligibility center. So I hope the importance of the eligibility center is felt by everyone on the call, that if you're thinking about playing sport at a US university at Division I or Division II in the NCAA, it might not be a bad idea to go to the NCAA Eligibility Center and register. This is a really long and laborious hyperlink or link, but a quick search of the Eligibility Center will get you there almost instantaneously. So I will stop talking, but thanks very much for listening.
Thanks, Seth. I wanted to really talk about this slide. I think the most important thing that you take away here in terms of NCAA eligibility is making sure that, really a lot of it is, ticking boxes, but understanding that there are a lot of requirements and educating yourself as much as possible on the requirements that exist. Things like, graduating in 4 years or less, which is a normal amount of time to do years 9 through 12, become really complicated later on if that's something that doesn't end up happening for you. Completing a specific core courses, which we'll talk about, and minimum GPAs. Really what it comes down to is when you are an international athlete and you're coming over to the US, coaches have to know as much about you as possible. So the more of this information that you have early, the better. You have the option, what the words that need to come out that you need to hear are like whether you're a final qualifier. That means you're eligible for financial aid, you're eligible to practice, you're eligible for competition. And that means you've met the core course requirement, you've got the GPA required for your division, and the test scores fit on a sliding scale. If you're a non-qualifier, you haven't quite met all the criteria, but you still meet a certain threshold. You then are required to serve a year in residence before you can be cleared for aid and practice and competition. And that becomes really difficult as an international athlete when all you want to do is play. And then the other part of it is an academic red shirt. If it makes you eligible for aid and practice, but you're not eligible for competition, which again, it can be very difficult when you're moving away from home and all you want to do is get on the field. So the key here is to try and meet as much of the NCAA eligibility criteria and hit those marks early. Next slide, please, Seth.
All right, I'm going to jump in here because a very important part to this process is the admission side, right? There's a lot about the athletic side and getting identified by coaches and setting yourself up with the NCAA and making sure you have everything filed there. But it's also an admission match, and it's a match with the school. So thinking about your academic performance throughout high school, it's making sure that your grades line up with the type of grades that the college or university is looking for. And there are a wide variety of different colleges and universities across the United States. But a big part of the athletic recruitment is the coaches' conversations with the admission office. That's what Seth and I do quite a bit. Seth and I are constantly working with coaches when they are identifying potential recruits or they're identifying student athletes who would really make a difference on their teams by gathering transcript information, looking over your academic profile to make sure you're also a good fit for the school. So that process happens quite early. That will depend on what sport you're interested in. It also depends on the NCAA or NCAA timeline for your sport. So there are a lot of rules and regulations on when a coach can start talking to you. They can start accepting your material to then look at the admission office. It happens before your final year of high school. Even on the Southern Hemisphere calendar, it'll be happening before that final year of high school. So there's the early application review, and it's being realistic, as Seth mentioned, not only realistic with your athletic talent, looking at the times or the stats of current players, but also looking on the admission page for general GPAs. We recalculate our grade point averages with the many curriculums available around the world, but we're looking for students, depending on the school, that also have been dedicated to their academics and not at that minimum of the NCAA cutoff, right? You have that sliding scale. So you really want to make sure you have the match with the school as well. There are a lot of different timing pieces, right? We'll get into the national letter of intent a little later and the timing of that. But a piece that will definitely come up in conversations is early decision, early action, and regular decision for students. These are three different timelines in admission where early decision is binding. You are saying, yes, I'm coming to this school. And that's a piece of your letter of intent when you also sign that as a binding agreement. Early action means you're applying to a school, and if you get in, you're in, but you can also continue to look at other schools. And regular decision is where you might want to apply to a few different schools. You're still talking to a few different coaches. Your timeline for signing might not be until April, the spring in the United States. So it's really thinking about the timeline. And many schools also look at that early decision in line with the national letter of intent, which we'll get to, and making sure their athletes are in the early part of the process. And that's for admission process. It's also to think about building our class. It's thinking about, we get asked often, why do you have such a large percentage of students at early? These are college priorities, and athletics is a college priority. So that's kind of just, it's part of the piece, but really making sure you are not just looking at it from an athletic lens, depending on the type of school you're looking at, but the academic and admission lens too. All right, I'm going to pass it back to Heather.
Right. So core courses is something that, took me a long time to get my head around moving to the US system. As a student in Australia, I'm sure a lot of you were like me in that you were able to start choosing the classes that you took from year 9 onwards. And that kind of creates a little bit of tension with what the NCAA requires and what you might like to do for your last few years of high school. The most important thing with core courses is making sure you understand early what it is that you actually can include and what will not be counted for you. So your English, math, science, social science, foreign languages, religion, or philosophy may not be something that you've always thought about including in your VCE or your year 11 and 12 subjects. But they really do need to be included because you need to meet the core course requirements. So really understanding the NCAA has great resources on their website for international students that allow you to look at what your state often has on offer and how that compares and what it might be counted for. For example, further math in Victoria is approved for a mathematics course, but some of the other mathematics are not. Legal studies can be approved as a social science. But, if you're counting on studying PE or health and human development, Commerce is an interesting one that doesn't get counted as well. So making sure that you really know what your core courses are and meeting all the credits that you need. Each semester in Australia, I know counts for 0.5 of a credit. So making sure that over those 4 years, you meet those core courses and getting on that as early as you possibly can in case you need to make a catch-up class. Again, I talked a little bit about core courses here. Psychology is a really good, interesting one that counts in most states. Again, the NCAA is really good at reviewing those classes and seeing if they count. But, you know, like most athletes, I studied PE and health and human development in high school, and that doesn't count as a core course, and you need those core courses. So sometimes those extra things that might be something that you really love doing might be something that you have to sacrifice in order to meet the requirements to come in and continue your athletic career here in the US. So really, you know, timeline becomes really important. You know, 9th grade should really be on here. Year 9 is when most people start to really think and choose about what subjects they're going to do in school. But 10th grade, and that's really important. So starting to look at mapping out the next 4 years. When are you going to do meet your English requirements? When are you going to meet your science requirements? And you'll have teachers at your school that are helpful and can give you, you know, a preview of what year 11 and 12 subjects might be available at your school. In 10th grade, you know, really starting to think about registering with the NCAA Eligibility Center and the sorts of paperwork that you might be required to do, your transcripts and getting copies into your Eligibility Center profile. The other thing is starting to think about when you're going to sit for the SAT or the ACT. Most American students will sit it more than once. So, you know, having a good chance to study for it and take it seriously and sit it one time and then being able to know what you're in for and going back and sitting it again. You know, a lot of schools will help you, you know, if you're talking to coaches or what score you might need or what they would like you to have or how you could super score 2 scores together and all that stuff that you might not have had to think about before. And then, you know, as you finish year 12, and, you know, especially with our school year being a little different in the US, you know, timeframes are going to be a little bit different. We talk about whether we can talk to students when we start talking to students in their junior year of high school. Many Australian students have started their senior year already. And so therefore, you know, making sure all your amateurism information, which we'll talk about in a minute, is up to date. All your transcripts are going to get sent from the school, which is something that our schools are not always used to as well in Australia. So all those extra steps, they do take a lot of work, and often you'll have to do a lot of it on your own. But, you know, the earlier you start thinking about it, the better.
All right, you heard Coach, you heard Heather talk about amateurism. This could be a big deal in Australia, right? You have heard about, there are a lot of club sports. There are a lot of sponsors. There are a lot of people who are paying for, you know, different types of sponsorships that are club-related sports. These are things you can't do, right? These are things that the NCAA will see as a violation. Of course, I jumped right to the don'ts. I should really start with the positive. So yes, save all your documents, save everything that shows that you are a legitimate athlete, a legitimate student athlete. Consult with the NCAA. If you're in touch with the coaches who are in touch with you are usually interested in you. They're excited about you, right? So asking questions to the coach about amateurism, if you have any concerns, before it happens, asking the coaches, right? This came up. This is an opportunity. How will this affect my potential to play at your school or play in college? The EducationUSA office as well, right? We are presenting with the EducationUSA office because they are in-country, in-city experts on the U.S. higher education process. And they have experts like Samantha Jackson, who also played the college level sports in the United States. So thinking about any kind of benefits that you might receive. You know, we have a great example of all of a sudden you're sitting there with a little Gatorade ad, and maybe not Gatorade, think of a sports drink in Australia or New Zealand or wherever you're from, but You are being paid to endorse a product. That is amateurism, right? You're getting paid for using your profile as an athlete. So those are big no-nos in the United States. So it's basically just making sure you're conscious of it, making sure that it's documented that you are doing all the right things as a student athlete in high school. The big thing is not accepting prize money or payments of any sort. The next slide we'll move on to is a national letter of intent. You've heard us talk about this.
I'm losing it. It's all frozen.
I'm frozen. Can you see me, hear me? You need me to, someone needs Seth to jump in? Nope, I'm good. Okay. So this is the national letter of intent where this is where you are signing
Yeah, good.
College or university where you are going to be playing. So this could happen before you actually get your admission decision. But as we talked about before, often the admission review will happen before to make sure the college is going to accept you. There shouldn't be a surprise if you sign a letter of intent, you've gone through the process with the coach or the admissions office, and then you get your admission. There is a tight timeline. It's a 7 days. You receive it, has to be filed, and it's binding for 1 academic year. So you need to make sure you sign this with the college or university, and this is your intent to play for them and only them. You sign 1 national letter of intent. And Seth talked a little about this when he gave the overview of different divisions, the NCAA Division I, II, and III, sports scholarships, merit, and need-based. Sports scholarships will be popular among Division I or II schools. It also depends on the budget. It depends on the size of the school, how much that sport has for athletic scholarships. You might have a mix of sports scholarships and need-based financial aid. It might be merit only. These are very school specific. The U.S. does it really well by confusing people because we like to do everything in a very individual way based on our school. So you will see you might, depending on the sport, you could get a full athletic scholarship. Not every sport has full athletic scholarships. They might have 2 for their entire team. So they have to break up these different athletic scholarships to make sure they can have their full roster or their team. Often that full athletic scholarship will cover your tuition and fees, your room and board, your books, everything you would need to be on campus as a student athlete. Then there are partial athletic scholarships. Merit can come in a variety of different forms. As Seth mentioned, Division III schools, because they are unable to give athletic scholarships, often they might have more merit scholarship or more financial aid. Private schools in the United States, Division III, have quite a bit of need-based financial aid. And then again, looking at the policy of need-based financial aid. International students, being a non-U.S. citizen, not every school in the U.S. can offer need-based financial aid. So that's another conversation with the coaches about, how much can your family truly afford? You will be asked to fill out a certificate of finances, fill out a CSS profile, which is also through the College Board. This is getting into the weeds, but Samantha Jackson and your experts in the EducationUSA office can help you understand College Board. But if you're not on a full athletic scholarship, your family will fill this out to project how much you can truly afford for your education. And then the college will look at, see how much they can offer you as an athletic scholarship, depending on sport, depending on your level, depending on your position. And then they'll look to see, are there merit? If the school offers merit, the need-based, or is it's athletic and then your family contribution, right? So there's definitely a mix. I would say, as Seth mentioned earlier, just because a school doesn't have sports scholarships like Division III doesn't mean they're not competitive. Some of our Division III schools in the United States are just as competitive as our Division I. It's just size of school. It's also the amount of publicity that a school might get. Seth is from Indiana University. It's a Big Ten school. There's a lot of national publicity, right? So it also thinking about publicity as well. So it's good to do your research, but you're talking on the coaches, and your length of scholarship will usually depend on the type of scholarship. Merit, need-based could be for 4 years. Athletic might be renewable as you continue to play on that team.
Perfect. So now, really quick, we're going to chat a little bit about what the student athlete journey to an athletic scholarship or to a place on the team might look like. The first one to recognize, which doesn't take too long to explain, is the being scouted journey. This is the traditional "don't call us, we'll call you" form of becoming a student athlete, where a coach or someone in the athletic office will find you through a variety of ways, whether that's during a competition, during a camp. They will see you on Huddle, or they'll see you somewhere online. So that's one of the more common ways for at least very, very elite sports. At Indiana University, it's basketball. So most of the students on our basketball team are scouted, and they're the ones who are being reached out to by our coaching staff to be brought onto the team, especially in basketball with such a small roster. So that's being scouted. That's one that you don't really have to work too hard, except get yourself out there as much as possible and get in competitions and become visible. And then the coaches will find you. That's usually reserved. The scouted portion is reserved for the highest level of competition in any region. The next one that we have there is working with a recruitment service. We'll go through a few questions in a second about what it means to go through a recruitment service. And then finally is contacting the college or university coaches directly and reaching out to them and promoting yourself, being your best hype person with the university itself. So before we jump into the colleges and universities contacting them directly, some tips to talk about when it comes to questions that you might want to ask of a recruitment service. It's not necessarily that there's a perfect answer for every one of these questions. It's more to give you a few ways to find the best fit with a recruitment service. I know you're probably sick of hearing that terminology from US schools and how nebulous it is that we always want to find the right fit. But the same thing does apply for recruitment service. You want to find that they are out for your best interest and that they are going to work hard on your behalf to meet your scholastic and athletic goals. So some of these questions are fairly self-explanatory, but I think it's good to repeat and hear them to keep in the back of your mind. How long have you been in the business? Are you new? Do you have all of these relationships? Kind of depending on which one. Like I said, one might not be perfect for you. One might not be the perfect for everyone. Maybe it's a new person in the field and they're a bit more hungry and you feel like that works better for you, or an established recruitment service where they have all of the connections with the coaches. Another question about, do they charge universities for their prospect information? If so, who are their clients? This kind of shows a little bit of the connections that they have with universities and how they're funding their work. Will they provide direct referrals to past clients? So this is another question to ask to show the openness and to show how student focused and how beneficial these recruitment services are for you and what's good for you, as opposed to what's going to make them the most money, even if it's not their current client, but a past client, if it fits well with you. Do they offer any guarantees? Usually this might be one of the most clear cut. If anybody offers a guarantee, you might want to be a little wary about who they are, simply because anyone who's offering a guarantee is probably trying to take your money, because there are no guarantees in this business, especially when it comes to how everything moves during the school year. If they haven't seen your final grades, your qualifying, your eligibility, if they're making a guarantee, I guarantee you'll be on prime time Indiana basketball starting 5. You should be a little wary of those type of promises and guarantees. Knowing how much they charge, if it fits within your budget, is another great one. Like I said previously, what do you do with the money? Are you giving back to the community? Is there a sense of well-being for the students instead of just making money off of that service? And then asking them about if they're scouting services providers, that they must be NCAA approved. So if they're offering any services, they do have to have a certification process. So if someone doesn't meet that certification process, you can be pretty certain that they don't have the clout, or they're not working directly with any of the other coaches or NCAA universities. So those are some questions. Hopefully they make sense. I'm sure you're going to come up with a lot more of your own, but those are a good place to start, we think.
So I'm going to jump in here with some tips. I sound like a broken record, but starting early is the most important thing you can do. One of the things that, as an Australian athlete, you might not be used to is filming all your workouts and all your games and all your practices. But very often, you're not going to have the coach turn up at your game, on a suburban basketball court and to watch you play. So having all that film is going to be super important. A good thing when it comes to understanding the level of the school that you might be applying for is, just Google the top recruits in your sport. Their film is all out there for everyone to see. See what services they're using to display their film. Are they using Huddle? Do they have it on YouTube? Those sorts of things. And you'll be able to see, how long is their video? Are they sending a 3-minute video or are they sending a 30-minute game? So those sorts of things are really good tips. You can find everything online these days, and just seeing what else is out there and your competition, really. One of the other things when it comes to sending film to coaches is you might not always get a reply, and sometimes that's not because they didn't look at your film, but different sports have different rules about when they're allowed to talk to you. If you're only in year 9 or year 10, we actually, as coaches, might be restricted from NCAA regulations from talking to you yet. So doing things like including your coach's information becomes really important, because we can call your coach and talk to them about, what sort of, what character you are. Are you a great leader on your team? Do you arrive on time, and all those other things? And are you working hard and progressing how they expect? And can they send us more film and those sorts of things? The other thing when it comes to film is making sure that you're sending really as high a quality film as you can get your hands on. And that might not be the film that your coach is recording for their purposes of doing a scouting report or something like that. You might need to get your mom or your friend to stand in the crowd and make sure the film is of you. Like Seth said, there is such a small percentage of high school players that go on to college. We want to see you dominating, showing that you are, in the top 2% or the top 10% of players that might come across our desks. So really keep that in mind. And the more film you get, the more chances of you being able to show your stuff is what's going to happen. Making sure you're sending your film or your information to the right coaches. Often, maybe if you're at a smaller school and a tennis program, there might only be one coach. But in a large football program, for example, there might be a coach that's specifically dedicated to international recruitment. There might be a position coach that if you're an offense or a defensive player that you should be sending your information to. And how you're contacting them as well. Are you using social media and email and those sorts of things? Being your own best recruiter is the most important thing you can do. Social media is very important. Often, again, coaches aren't getting to meet you in person the first time they hear about you. Making sure your Twitter and your Facebook and your Instagram are a true representation of who you are, that you're not liking and retweeting things that might be offensive or that don't really align with your values, because that's what a coach might see of you for the very first time. And if that doesn't align with that school and that coach, then you're going to miss out on a really good opportunity. Camps is another big thing, going summer camps and having opportunities to get on campus goes back to Seth's point of finding a good fit. You want to be able to see what it's like to be coached by those coaches. You want to see what it's like to be on that university's campus. So they are a really good opportunity for you to see what that school is like. But also, you want to be in touch and creating connections with that team and those coaches before you show up at camp. That's a really important thing. The more you talk to them, the more you know whether they're interested in you or not. Maybe you could go to 3 or 4 summer camps on a trip around schools that you're interested in, and you don't want to go to a school that is not interested in you or doesn't see you as a fit for their program. So creating those relationships beforehand, providing coaches with your information, making sure they're looking forward to you turning up on their campus is the biggest part of summer camps. The other thing, I guess, when it comes to contacting coaches, the other tip I can kind of give you is make the coach's life as easy as possible. You make up a very small, international students make up a very small percentage of the students that come across their desks. And so things like, if you can convert your GPA to a 4.0 scale, put it up there immediately so that they can compare you to the other students that they're coming across. If you know what computer system that they use, if they're using YouTube to look at all their videos, make sure that's a good format for them to send their film. Don't send them film on a really obscure video software program that they can't open, because they might not reply to chase you up to say, hey, I can't watch your film. So the more things that you can do ahead of time to create that, to start that conversation with a coach is super important. Looking through, the other things of contacting, you start early. Use EducationUSA as a great resource. Here in the US, high school students often have guidance counselors and academic counselors that will help student athletes prepare all their information, and you might not have that resource within your school. So reach out to EducationUSA and find those resources that will help you put everything together. Resources like websites, berecruited.com and things like that are super helpful as well. And those recruitment agents and recruitment services that might help you reach out to schools that you might normally not be able to get in contact with. And then our last tip I kind of want to give is really when you start to get towards the exciting end of the process, when you start to get offers and schools are like, we want you to come and be a student athlete for us. Questions like, can I commit to this offer? Is this can I come on an official visit? And all those sorts of questions. Having a list of questions to ask those coaches when you get to the exciting end of it is also really important.
Those are wonderful. Kind of one of the last slides we have before we jump into questions is this one about resources. If you didn't pick up from what Heather was talking about, contacting coaches, contacting universities yourself is a hustle. You do have to do a lot of the work. So hopefully some of these resources, these search tools, as well as a lot of those tips will help you in kind of developing your what should be a multi-pronged strategy. There's no silver bullet, if that idiom translates. There's no silver bullet to make sure that you will get a scholarship if I just have a 3-minute and 20-second YouTube video of this highlight. There's no guarantees, there's no certainties. It's all about putting in the time, putting in the work, which as student athletes, you all are very, very used to. So hopefully these resources are helpful. Hopefully this presentation was helpful in giving you some of the groundwork in what it means to be a student athlete, the kind of crazy world you're getting yourself into with NCAA, NAIA, NJCAA, the requirements, the eligibility, as well as the path, the process that you're going to take this journey to hopefully coming and being a student athlete. It is a lot of work, but it is very fulfilling, as I'm sure everybody on the call can attest. So with that, I think we're going to close the presentation portion and we're going to head to questions. So I think that also means that Heather is going to recuse herself. Is that the right term?
Thanks, everyone. I really enjoyed presenting to you today and I wish you all the best.
Thanks, Heather. Thanks for joining us. And we will allow her to leave. I'm sure you can all appreciate that not only her information, but what Seth and Kaylani have shared right now has been fantastic. We know that this is a really fast session. We know that there's been a bunch of questions that have come through that we are not going to get to today. Do not fear. We will be responding to all of those questions in regards to our Facebook Live pages. For those that are joining us outside of Australia and New Zealand, please be rest assured that the same processes we're talking about Australia and New Zealand also apply to you as well. So everything that we talk about, you can use within your own environments too. There are a couple of questions that I've sent through to Seth and Kaylani in regards to preparing. And I think one that we'll start with, and I'll throw it out to maybe Kaylani because I see that she's not on mute, is We don't calculate GPAs in Australia, Kaylani, and should I self-calculate, or can you give me some advice?
Great. Good question. Thank you, Samantha. Great. Thanks for offering or putting through the question. We do that work for you, right? That's part of our job. Our job as international admission officers and our job in reading transcripts from around the world is to be able to understand your grading system. There's also an NCAA grading system where they have compiled different grading systems from around the world. So you could also take a look at that. That's easy to find on the website. It's on the NCAA website, academic guide. We might be able to throw a link in there for you. But we will do that for you. We have students who apply on 20-point scales, 10-point scales, 8-point scales, letter grades, number grades, letter grades that don't match letter grades in the US. So that's part of our job. So you don't need to worry about that side of it. If you do have questions about that, again, Education USA is a wonderful resource in helping to convey the grading chart and grading system. Samantha, I think you're on mute. Okay.
Mute. So apologies. I'm going to throw this over to you, Seth. What happens if I don't complete a foreign language in high school?
Great question. There's kind of two sides as any student athlete. You have to think about like the two paths that you're on, that you have to kind of juggle two different things at the same time. There's admission to the university, and there's eligibility for a athletic standpoint through the NCAA. So as I understand it, part of the core courses, you have to find out if that core course of foreign language is required through the NCAA. As I understand it, it is not. So there'll be some additional courses. Some students use comparative religion, some students use Spanish or a foreign language as their additional NCAA core course. So you would want to work with your compliance officer or your coach to ensure that lack of foreign language isn't going to impede or isn't going to hold you back from being a full qualifier, as Heather had said earlier in the presentation. That's the athletic track, or the one parallel path that you're going on of eligibility to play and compete and practice. Then there's the other side, which is the admission side. So this is a easy enough answer because any university in the United States, if you remember these two words, it'll give you the answer to all of your questions. It depends. So every single school will do something different. Indiana University might require a foreign language, but down the street at Purdue, they might not, or vice versa. There might be flexibility with foreign language requirements at one school and not at another. So this is where Kehlani and I are the main point of contact, where you would reach out to us and you'd say, ooh, I decided not to take any foreign language. Is that going to hurt my chances of admission? And so you would talk to us about what that would mean for that. So it's all depends. I wish there was an easier answer than that, but it does depend. So find the school that you're interested in and ask them.
And I think what everyone will also realize is sometimes the answer is it depends. So there is a lot of research that you have to do. And people like Seth and Kehlani don't do that to make it harder for you. But there's never a stock answer. I know we're getting to the close of our session, and there's a couple of really important questions that I want to do. So I think we're going to have about 7 minutes to go, unless I get any talk from my fearless leaders delivering this session. And I'm going to throw this out to Kehlani. You may not know, Seth is from Indiana University, a large public institution. Kehlani is from a selective private school. So here, this question should not surprise anyone, but this question is really directed at selective schools and Ivies in particular. I'm a brilliant athlete. Do my grades really need to be that good? So Kehlani, over to you.
Yes, yes, yes. Very good. So we have a kind of an athletic assessment, right? So that early read is an athletic admission assessment. So you do need to work hard in high school, especially if you're looking at highly selective schools, if you're looking at the Ivies. And if you're looking at schools, and again, going back to that admission page to look at kind of the academic mid-range of students who get admitted. We are looking for students who are still going to do well in our classrooms. If we bring in a student who's a brilliant athlete, but is struggling in the classroom and struggling to keep up, those professors walk right over to the admission office and say, how did this student get in? It reflects poorly on the institution, and that student wouldn't be able to keep up in the classroom. So you got to keep up on court or whatever sport you're in, but also in the classroom too. That's a big part of it.
And probably Seth can answer this too and add to it. It's about finding your best fit institution. You can still be a relatively good student, but if you go to one of the smartest institutions on the planet and are always struggling to meet the academic criteria, how is that also going to be fun on your athletic team, because you're not equally going to be able to focus? So when we talk about you finding your best fit, we're doing that for a whole ream of reasons. So I'm going to throw back over to Seth and probably have one closing question as well. And I think it was clearly explained in the presentation, but Seth, do I need to use an agent? Is that my only way of getting to a US college?
No, you do not. I think, yeah, there are benefits to using a recruitment service. There are benefits, sometimes they're called agents. There's benefits to that. There's major drawbacks. It's up to you, and you have to take a kind of hard look with your family, with your guardian, whoever's helping you through the process of applying to college as a potential student athlete, to see what makes the most sense for you and fits within your goals. So like we said, sometimes there's a lot more hustle involved if you're doing things by yourself, but you can also be in complete control of what's happening. You don't have to worry about a recruitment service possibly landing you a scholarship at a university that maybe have, for lack of a better term, you could have gone to a more competitive school. So it's possible that you could have gone to a more competitive school, but they took the easy way out because they wanted the client money from wherever they were. So there is some kind of dance that you have to play to see what is best for you. But the definitive answer to that question is no, you are not required. It doesn't give you special benefits to use a recruitment service at all. And sometimes if it's a poorly reputable recruitment service, it could actually hinder your process.
So not that I also want to address the elephant in the room, but COVID-19 is in the air. If you're tuning in from Melbourne, we've just gone down to further lockdown. What does that mean if I can't take my SAT? Now, there is a rule with the NCAA in regard to meeting requirements for compliance. But in regards to US colleges who will look at my admissions file, what happens, or how do you look at my SAT or not if it's test optional? So I may need to give my SAT result to the NCAA, but do I need to give it to you as well?
I can jump in. I'll start. So Davidson just went test optional for the first time and for the next 3 cycles because of COVID. But our student athletes, because of the NCAA requirement, you still need to submit your ACT or SAT score. You'll be submitting that to the NCAA. It will come through the admission office most likely, but because we are test optional, we're going to be looking more closely at your transcript, your performance in school. So that goes back to the last question. And then also the supplemental essays, right? So when you're applying to Davidson, we have a few extra supplemental essays, and we look closely at your writing, your contributions, how you support others, perhaps. You're really talented in your sport. So we're looking for community members as well. And that is part of applying to a smaller school where the community engagement is quite high and is part of it.
And I'm going to probably add another question if I can. It might be our leading question for the day. And this is where the relationship between your officers as admissions obviously intersect with being a student athlete. And there's a question coming through with how many colleges should I apply to? Now, that might be great if you're applying for academic entry. But obviously you need to look for the sports scholarship or being recruited first. But if you could talk a little bit more about that, or how you advise students that communicate with your officers, that would be great.
Seth, you want to jump on that one?
Yeah,
first?
yeah, for sure. That is a great question. there is quite a unique, there's quite a few different paths that student athletes take to a university. Some students will see that the admissions office has never heard of before, but the compliance office has every shred of academic material and their SAT score and their great grandmother's maiden name, and they have every single document they need. And I've never even heard of the student. So some students follow their path by going that way, where they are only applying to the schools that are extremely interested in them athletically. So Samantha, to answer your question, the number of schools for them is very dependent on the number of interested sports scholarship offers they have. Some other school students go the other way and they'll apply simultaneously to talking to their university. For a student who's not a student athlete, we will usually say keep it within single digits. It's mind-boggling to try to expand beyond 9 schools to apply to. It gets very, very expensive first and foremost. And then especially if you're applying to all of these safety schools for athletics and academics, your choices, you're just going to be overwhelmed with the amount of offers at the end. So we say keep it in single digits. And sometimes that applies to athletes. Sometimes that might change if you have a whole lot of interest from a whole lot of schools and you want all of those options.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I would just add that, our favorite phrase, it depends, right, on the situation, as Seth described. I would also say that, Seth mentioned your safety schools, so it's being realistic about the schools you're applying to. Athletics aside, if you're being recruited, that's one piece of it, right? Then you'll probably have, offers, or there might be scholarship offers, and that you'll get good news from the school academically if you're going through the whole process. If you're not applying, if you're not being recruited and you're looking to play club sports, you're looking to still be involved in sports, it's looking at as single digits, 3 where you feel pretty confident you're going to get in, right? You've looked at the academic profile, you feel confident with your academic profile, you've looked at financial aid, and you've talked to your family about what you might qualify for and how much your family can afford. Schools that, you feel like might be a little bit of a reach, and then ones that you think, gosh, I would really love to get in there, but it might be out of my range, but I'm still going to apply. Bottom line, you should be excited about all the schools you apply to, right? Because in the end, you might get good news from one, and you got to be excited about going there. It also, the it depends piece also thinks about early decision. Early decision in the U.S. is binding. So if you're admitted, you're withdrawing applications from Australia and New Zealand and Hong Kong and everywhere else around the world, right? Binding means you're going to that school. So, again, you have great experts with EducationUSA. We hope this was a good start, and you've gained a lot of good information. We know we gave you a lot of information in a short period of time, but it's an exciting time, right? You should enjoy this and really kind of be excited, but be proactive. I think that's the piece we wanted to get across, was be proactive. Coach Heather gave you great information about putting together film, stats before you contact the coach.
Thanks, Kaylani. And don't forget, you can always reach out to your EduSA officers as well. And we are more than happy to help with that process and those tasks. We are really designing Virtual Week to be helping students that are in Year 12 in New Zealand or grade 11 in Australia. If you are sitting here and watching this presentation and you are currently wanting to pack your bags to start this August in US colleges, we really ask you to reach out to them for guidance, and we will continue to help you with that guidance as well. Our final question that I think is important to at least approach right now is, what are the changes in being recruited as a student athlete because of COVID? So if you're applying to go this year, you should be well aware that SAT and ACT scores are being waived if you are starting or scheduled to start this fall. That may change for next year's intake as well, but those announcements have not yet been made. That being the case, if you are sitting in any of our regions, you should be still looking at taking the standardized test, either the SAT or the ACT. But again, don't be afraid to reach out to our EduSA officers, the colleges that are on your shortlist, to be answering and asking any of those questions. Before we do final thank yous and close today's brilliant session, I just want to give Kaylani and Seth a final chance to have closing remarks. And as I said, Heather has also sent us a text message and said, thanks for letting her join us and join you, and enjoy the research. And it really can be fun. Don't think it's a drag. It can be a really fun process. And of course, reach out to EducationUSA. So Kaylani, you're unmuted. So if you want to start with final remarks, that would be great.
Great. I kind of jumped the gun there earlier, but I would say, as Samantha said, this can be fun. This is the place you're going to call home for the next 4 years. You know, get in touch with students and beyond the student athletes. If you're recruited, our schools make it really easy to go on the admission web pages to contact current students who either work in our office or affiliated. So make sure that fit piece is really getting to know the place by speaking with current students and being able to see yourself there, academically and athletically and socially.
Thanks, Kaylani. Seth, final comments.
Yeah. Applying to university as a student athlete, especially, there is a lot of work. It is a lot of back and forth. There's a lot to juggle, but I can't emphasize enough that every student athlete I've spoken to, the reward is worth the work. So if it doesn't seem like there's a light at the end of the tunnel, once you arrive at your destination, whether that is at the varsity level or at the club level, which is also competitive, or at the intramural level, coming to university and having sport be a part of your time at university is incredibly rewarding. So the work is worth it, and the reward is something you won't forget for the rest of your life. So when you're trying to trudge through the SAT prep, or you're trying to trudge through all of the eligibility requirements or everything you have to do on the eligibility center, remember that the reward is worth it. And we look forward to seeing you on all of our campuses and on all of our courts and all of our fields. So thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone. I'm going to take you through some final housekeeping items. Thanks so much for joining us today. Wherever you came to us from, we trust that you found this incredibly helpful and informative. Don't forget to check out the remainder of our week. For anyone considering going to US colleges, be with us tomorrow in regards to completing your application. It's everything that everyone has to do, so please join us for that. Again, follow our hashtag, visit our Facebook pages, and continue with those sessions. If you've got any questions, please reach out to your local office. And for those that have joined us, thanks so much. If you're a student and still on school holidays, enjoy that school holidays. And we look forward to seeing you in our offices soon. Thanks very much, everyone. Goodbye.